there any point in introducing Ariana Grande at this point? I don't think so. I believe she was, and perhaps still is, the most followed woman on Instagram ever, which is an amazing feat to achieve on any social media platform, because social media these days, as we know, is perhaps the most influential way to get anything across to the youth and even anyone really. So to have that achievement, it is insane. Aside from that, she's obviously so huge in the world of music. She's had plenty of massive smash hits, #1 hits with a lot of songs, and it seems as though even as popular as she was even back in like 2014, 2015, that popularity has just seen a rise as years have gone by. It's always been a huge shame to me though, because I do think she is a really talented artist, but I've never really loved an album she's put out. I've controversially not liked her past 2 albums, and I say controversially because, my god, the critical acclaim Sweetener and Thank You Next got is through the roof compared to her previous ones, and it seems as though people suddenly started to think of her as like a truly great modern pop artist, which she is, but I just wasn't sold on every track on each of those albums. Luckily though, I do think Positions is an improvement. Not massive improvement though, because I do think it has a few duds, but I think overall it is perhaps the most consistent release she's put out in quite a few years. I know no one will agree with that at all, but I think the issues I had with the last 2 albums, I just couldn't really see past, whereas this album, there's not as many problems for me. First of all, I think lyrically, it knows what it is. It's not the deepest, most mind-blowing lyrical album, but it's straight to the point, and it doesn't really ever hit a point where it's cringy. Like there were moments on the last few albums where I just found to be really, really cringe, like 7 Rings, for example. But I wouldn't say anything drops to that level here. I think production-wise, it's very consistent throughout, so every track feels like it's fitting into the album, whereas I think Sweetener was a weird thing for me, where you could tell exactly when you were hitting a single. Like No Tears Left to Cry and Breathing were so obviously singles, and you could tell where the album kind of trailed off with the album deep cuts, because the effort was nowhere near as strong on those tracks as they were the singles. Whereas the flow of this album just is consistent throughout. Motive, My Hair, Positions, I guess Point of View, Obvious. They all could be singles, but it's not like any of them really stand out in a way that makes them completely different to the other tracks, because production-wise, they're very similar. The album starts off with the track Shut Up, which I think is probably the worst track here, because it doesn't really open the album up in a particularly strong way. It also doesn't really fit the theme of the album, and the vocals here are really rough. This sounds like a demo to me. The way she's singing the shut up. I just feel like she needed to do another take on that. She's a great singer, but you wouldn't think it with this opening track. Once you hit 34 plus 35, you know what that equals. You realise that the album is way more following in a direction, because the lyrics here are very obvious in what they're inspired by. When Ariana says the line, "Fuck me till daylight," which I was not quite expecting, I was a bit like, but it's catchy as hell. She knows what she wants. It's straight to the point lyrically. She's been eating healthy. What more do you want? Motive is definitely one of the best tracks here as well, with Doja Cat. Doja Cat's verse isn't as good as I expected, but I think it sort of works in context of a song anyway. I feel like you could take the verse off and it wouldn't be a huge detriment to the song. I really like the lyrics here, where she's essentially saying, you know, I can't really give you the green light. Shout out to John Legend and Andre 3000, because Green Light is a big bop from 2009, legendary track. But essentially here she's saying, I can't give you the green light. I can't say yes until I know what you're going to do. What's your motive? Are you just going to, you know, throw me away? You're going to treat me badly? Tell me what it is. You do hear a couple of tracks that are clearly going for the classic R&B type stuff, straight out of the 90s. That Weekend track really does feel like the classic sort of stuff that you'd get from like the soul R&B days that was really huge in the 90s, even the early 2000s. I think both sides play their part really well here. Ariana's vocals towards the end of the track are to die for as well. Jesus Christ, you forget sometimes how good of a singer she is when she just breaks out in the ways that she does, because she sounds so good here. But yeah, I think the track's pretty good. It's not as good as the last time they collaborated, because that was a great track, Love Me Harder. But this is a pretty solid one. And the Ty Dolla $ign track too, it probably is a bit musically more appealing. It just has vocal melodies from Ariana. She's not as showy-offy with her vocal chops, but I think musically it's just a bit of a more enjoyable track, because Off the Table isn't totally memorable. You know, I don't know if I could completely reel off the tune off the top of my head without listening to it first. There are very straight to the point topic tracks like My Hair. She's asking a guy to play with her hair, because girls do like that, to be fair. But here, it doesn't really matter that the topic of the song is so simple. It doesn't really matter, because she's sounding great on the track. It's just like a really breezy, upbeat, summery type jam that, you know, even if the lyrics are incredibly basic, she makes up for it as well by just giving us a really good tune. And aside from the opening track, Shut Up, I think, you know, as soon as you get to the second track, you know exactly what you're going to get. Like, the tracks are very much about, like, you know, men and being a bit horny. So I think from the get-go, you at least know that your expectations in the lyrical department aren't exactly going to be that high. And I feel like it sets the bar quite well, so that even when you hit tracks that might not be lyrically all that impressive, you don't really mind if the tracks themselves sound good. Which, again, talking about her previous two albums, I don't think they had that bar set early on, and there was never really that point where you were like, okay, I think I know what this album's going to be about, because I just think some of the lyrical themes previously were a bit mismatched, not really on point. But this time around, I think it's just working in her favour. It's a shame though that we do get weak moments like Just Like Magic, where the track is just incredibly narcissistic, just feels like Seven Rings light, like a B-Tech Seven Rings. Some of the lines she throws out here, where she's just like talking about how, like, you know, she puts her makeup on and then suddenly she's a magnet. I mean, obviously, there's no denying she's very attractive, let's not deny that, but just lines like, I get everything I want because I attract it. I just think he could have written better lyrics here. The entire theme of the track is just so not there. Then you get weird moments for me where tracks like 6:30 or West Side just don't have like a very strong melody at the core of them. Like, I just feel like they breeze by really quickly and there's just nothing really carrying the song. 6:30 is just like a ride till I die type anthem, you know, you'll be with me no matter what type stuff. You're gonna always be my crush type thing. I guess it's sort of like Still Into You by Paramore a little bit. But yeah, like, again, just musically not impressive at all. There's nothing carrying the track to make me think, wow, I'd go back to this and enjoy it. It's strange to me though that once you get to the final 4 tracks, you hit the best tracks on the entire thing, aside from Motive and My Hair, which also highlights. But usually with a pop album, you don't hit the last leg of the album and find the best songs. Usually with a pop album, they all come pretty early on. But this time around, she's given us jams till the end. I really like the way that she blends her vocals really well with the instrumentals on Love Language and Obvious. Like, her voice, the tone of her voice is perfect for the beat that she's been handed. They're pretty straightforward tunes, to be fair, but I think when she's in her bag and just, you know, providing her really strong vocals over these kinds of tracks, she's untouchable, I think. Like, there really aren't many vocalists in pop that are like, wow, you have one hell of a voice. There just isn't. I mean, Adele, yeah, sure, but she doesn't make pop songs in the same way that Ariana does. I have already talked about positions. I think this track holds up really well. I think it'll do well for her as well in terms of being the single. You know, again, pretty straightforward type stuff. She's just trying to sell herself in the same way you would on like a Tinder bio. I cook, you know, I do all kinds of things. And I like the theme of the final song too, Point of View, where she's wanting to view herself from the guy's perspective, which I think is pretty interesting because she's saying that, you know, she has all these insecurities, which is interesting that even like, you know, celebrities have these insecurities about themselves because we just view them as like perfect people. She's saying that she'd love to be able to see herself from their perspective and be like, do you see those things I see about myself? It's a pretty clever way to you know, word the track, and lyrically it is pretty impressive too, which again, I think thematically she's not always been that great at this on previous albums, but I do think this is a nice sign to show that there's a lot of like maturity and growth. I would have thought that a horny album would show maturity and growth. I would never have predicted it. I would never have predicted it. But yeah, I think there's a lot to like about this album. I think overall it is an improvement for me compared to her previous albums. She's on the right track, I think. I think, you know, she's getting the tunes down, the vocals are working really well, and there's just something about this album that just works for me than the last few, which again won't be a popular take, but I guess I'm just here to tell you how I feel. There are still duds here for me, and I think there's progress to be made, but I think for now a 6.5 out of 10 is fair for me. It's a solid album, and I think it's definitely worth your time. I think you'll get a lot of tracks out of this that you'd enjoy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you think of this album. Thank you for watching my review. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you have a good day, and subscribe if you haven't already, and goodbye.